4 islands. Thick fog. Engines so quiet you could mistake them for fishing boats. And by the time the Russian 61st Naval Infantry Brigade realized what was happening, Ukraine's Marines were already on shore, and the Kremlin's entire southern river strategy was bleeding out in the dark. Parts of this analysis were researched with AI tools, but every fact was verified by me. Now here is the part that stops you cold. While Ukrainian Marines were seizing those islands in the Dnipro River Delta, Vladimir Putin was on camera, smiling, asking his commanders if they were advancing in the Zaporizhzhia direction, telling the world everything in the south was going according to plan. That video exists. That moment is real. And it may be one of the most brutally ironic frames this war has produced. But to understand how we got here, we need to rewind. Not to the beginning of the war, just to one decision made in March 2024 that set this entire collapse in motion. Russia built a river fleet. That sentence sounds almost unremarkable until you understand what it was actually supposed to do. The Russian Defense Ministry assembled this fleet with a very specific mission: patrol the island zones scattered across the Dnipro and Kherson Delta, control river logistics, and physically block any Ukrainian attempt to cross or infiltrate from the western bank. In military doctrine terms, a river fleet is a force multiplier. It extends your reach into terrain where tanks cannot go and roads do not exist. On paper, this was a smart move. The centerpiece of this fleet was the Project 1204 Shmel-class patrol boat. These vessels were transported all the way from the Caspian Sea to the Kherson waterways with enormous logistical effort. They carried heavy machine guns. They had armored hulls. They looked serious in photographs. Russian state media covered their arrival with the kind of breathless enthusiasm usually reserved for rocket launches. Here is what I found fascinating and genuinely unsettling about what came next. Those boats were built with 1970s technology. Slow, wide, low maneuverability. They were essentially floating targets wearing armor that FPV drones simply do not care about. A Ukrainian FPV drone costs somewhere between $300 and $800 depending on the configuration. A Shmel-class boat costs millions. The math was never going to work in Russia's favor, and the data shows it did not. According to United 24 media reporting from May of this year, Russia had massed more than 300 boats in the Kherson direction. 300. That number sounds like overwhelming force. But quantity without quality in modern drone warfare is not strength. It is a target-rich environment. The real breaking point came in December 2024. Ukrainian forces struck the Russian fleet's main base and radar installation at Olenivka. That single strike did not just destroy boats. It destroyed the command and control brain of the entire river operation. Without functional radar and without a coordinated command structure, the remaining boats became isolated, uncoordinated, and increasingly vulnerable. Reports that surfaced through the Atesh partisan movement describe something close to panic in the Russian command chain. Evacuation teams were reportedly disbanded. The last intact boats were described as rotting from neglect at makeshift moorings. Russia's river wall had not been breached. It had simply disintegrated from the inside. Now zoom forward to June. Ukraine's 34th Separate Marine Brigade has been watching all of this. They have been feeding intelligence, running UAV surveillance, and mapping the blind spots that the collapsed river fleet left wide open. The operational planners in Kyiv identified 4 islands in the delta zone between Kherson City and Oleshki as primary objectives: Oleksivsky Island, Pamkinsky Island, Krulik Island, Korbeliv Island. These are not large pieces of land. Do not imagine white sand beaches or rolling hills. We are talking about muddy, mine-saturated, river delta terrain where conventional infantry doctrine fails completely and armored vehicles are useless. Military planners who looked at maps of this zone initially described the mission of seizing these islands as bordering on impossible. Weather changed the calculation. Thick fog rolled in. Rain followed. The kind of visibility conditions where a patrol boat 20 meters away is invisible to the naked eye, and where thermal imaging has reduced effectiveness due to humidity and precipitation. The 34th Brigade had been waiting for exactly this window. Specially trained Marine units moved into position just before first light. Small tactical boats, whisper-quiet engines, no lights. They hit Oleksivsky Island first, neutralizing Russian observation posts before those positions could transmit a warning. Then the operation cascaded. Krylik, Korbelev, Pamkinsky. Wave after wave, the Ukrainian Marines moved through the dark water. Simultaneously, FPV drone teams and pre-registered artillery batteries opened up on Russian positions and escape routes. The coordinates had already been locked in. This was not improvisation. This was a rehearsed, layered strike that hit every pressure point at once. Elements of the Russian 61st Naval Infantry Brigade and soldiers of the 98th Guards Airborne Division, two units with serious reputations on paper, were caught completely flat-footed. They fled. Ukrainian local media sources confirmed the withdrawal from all four islands. And here is the detail that makes the military picture stark. Russian ground units in Oleshki, just hundreds of meters across the water, could see what was happening. They could not do anything about it. The river fleet that was supposed to be the rapid response force simply did not exist anymore. The soldiers on those islands were on their own, and they knew it. What Russia left behind was not just equipment. It was something harder to reissue from a supply depot. It was the psychological credibility of their southern river defense. Now let us talk about what this actually means strategically, because this is where the story gets genuinely consequential. Fire control is the key concept here. By holding those islands, Ukraine now has elevated observation points and direct fire positions that cover significant portions of the eastern bank. The data shows that Russian logistics infrastructure in and around Oleshki, ammunition storage points, staging areas, vehicle parks, has now moved from the category of difficult targets to the category of regularly serviced targets. Ukrainian UAVs operating from or using these islands as relay and observation anchors can see deeper into Russian-held territory than they could 72 hours before the operation began. The Konki Road Bridge, which was one of the primary routes Russian units used to move personnel and supplies in this area, is now within consistent fire range. An ordinary Russian soldier who previously arrived at a forward position by armored vehicle or logistics truck must now, according to available Ukrainian military reporting, walk 20 to 30 kilometers on foot from Kostrozhivka carrying combat equipment. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a forced degradation event that accumulates every single day. According to analysis published by the Institute for the Study of War, the loss of key river positions in the Kherson Delta sector creates cascading effects on Russian operational logistics that cannot be quickly reversed through ground redeployment alone. This isn't confirmed as an exact quote from ISW on this specific operation, so check their daily updates for the most current framing. But the pattern they have documented throughout this war is consistent with what we are seeing here. Here is something that did not make the major headlines, but absolutely should have. Ukraine's electronic warfare capability played a central role in this operation that goes beyond the physical destruction of boats. Ukrainian domestically produced electronic warfare systems, the Noda and Pokrova platforms, were reportedly activated simultaneously with the marine assault. These systems targeted Russian navigation and radio communications on the water. The practical result was that Russian command could not reliably communicate with units on the islands, even while those units were under assault. The command chain was functionally severed, not by destroying the command post, but by jamming the signal. This is the doctrine shift that matters most for future warfare analysis. Ukraine is not simply building a better drone. It is integrating drone strikes, electronic warfare suppression, pre-registered artillery, and special operations forces into a single coordinated package that activates simultaneously. Each component degrades a different Russian capability at the same moment. Drones hit physical positions. Electronic warfare scrambles communications. Artillery closes escape routes. Marines capture ground. The Russian commander on the other end of this, facing obsolete equipment and a shattered communications chain, is not making tactical decisions. He is reacting to emergencies on multiple frequencies at once, and losing all of them. The ironic caption to all of this is still that Putin video. The timing of it sits in the historical record now like a strange artifact. Here is the leader of one of the world's largest militaries asking subordinates if they are advancing in Zaporizhzhia, projecting confidence in a region he is describing as secure. while in real time, a different part of his southern front is coming apart in the fog. This isn't speculation about his knowledge or intent. What is documented is the gap between the public message and the operational reality at the exact same moment. Let us look at what comes next and be honest about what is confirmed versus what is projected. Ukraine's medium-term options from these island positions include several documented possibilities. Sustained fire pressure on Oleshky's outer defense perimeter is the most immediate. Ukrainian military statements have indicated an intent to maintain pressure rather than pause and consolidate. The complete interdiction of the Konki Bridge is a logical next step given its role in Russian logistics. This isn't confirmed as a scheduled operation, but the targeting logic is straightforward. Further south, the geography opens up toward Holopristan and the approaches to the Kinburn Peninsula. Control of the Dnipro estuary, even partial fire control, creates pressure on Russian logistics corridors, running toward Crimea from the north. This is the longer-term strategic picture that Ukrainian planners have described in public statements, though specific operational timelines are not confirmed. Ukraine's domestically produced long-range systems add another layer to this. The Flamingo cruise missile, reported to have a range of approximately 3,000 kilometers, means that rear-area Russian logistics infrastructure, command nodes, and Crimea connection roads are not safe simply because they are far from the front line. The satellite and drone surveillance network that Ukraine and its partners have built means that large Russian military shipments moving toward the Kherson front can be identified and tracked well before they arrive. Deep strike capability transforms what would otherwise be a localized tactical success into a sustained operational siege. The Russian side of this equation is genuinely complicated, and it is worth presenting what Russian official sources have said. Russian state media has not prominently covered the loss of these specific islands. Official Russian military statements have focused on claimed advances elsewhere on the front line. This isn't unusual in wartime information management, and both sides curate what they publicize. What is observable from open-source mapping, partisan reporting, and Ukrainian military releases is the physical withdrawal from the four islands. That withdrawal is documented. There is a human dimension to this that gets lost in the tactical analysis. Reports from the Kherson region indicate that Russian units in this sector are experiencing what is being described as increased voluntary rotation requests, which in military terms often signals morale stress rather than administrative scheduling. This pattern is consistent with what the Institute for the Study of War and other open-source trackers have noted across multiple Russian units dealing with next-generation drone warfare. Professional soldiers from the naval infantry and airborne divisions, some of Russia's most capable formations on paper, are struggling to adapt to an environment where the enemy can see them from above at all times, jam their communications, and strike them with weapons that cost a fraction of what it takes to replace the personnel and equipment being destroyed. The Dnipro Delta itself is paying an environmental cost that almost nobody is covering. The Kakhovka Dam destruction in 2023 already disrupted the Delta ecosystem severely. Intensive ammunition use and fuel leaking from destroyed and sunken Russian vessels are adding new contamination to a wetland system that was already stressed. Ukrainian forces on captured islands have reportedly deployed rapid environmental assessment teams. This isn't confirmed as a large-scale cleanup operation, but the acknowledgement that the environmental dimension exists is, at minimum, a messaging contrast with the Russian approach, which has not addressed it publicly. Time is the variable that does not show up on maps but shapes everything. Ukraine is operating in the summer operational window, which historically favors mobile and amphibious operations before autumn rains complicate ground movement. Russia's preparation timeline for winter defensive works on the left bank has reportedly been disrupted. Some military analysts estimate the loss of these island positions delays Russian fortification work in the area by 6 to 8 weeks. This is not confirmed by Russian official sources, and it should be treated as an estimate. But if accurate, it represents a compounding advantage. Every week of delay in defensive preparation is a week Ukraine can use to advance capabilities, bring new weapons online, or consolidate the positions already taken. Here is the pattern that connects all of it. And this is the dot that most coverage misses. The 4 islands are not the point. They are the proof of concept. Ukraine has demonstrated that the integration of electronic warfare, FP5E drones, pre-registered fires, and quiet maritime infiltration can defeat Russian conventional defensive positions in complex terrain, where Russia assumed it had natural advantages. If this doctrine works in the Dnipro Delta, it works on other rivers. It works in other wetland environments. It works wherever Russian forces assume that geography itself is their ally. The 34th Marine Brigade did not just take 4 muddy islands in a river delta. They published a new chapter in the manual on how to fight in the age of cheap drones, electronic suppression, and networked fires. The Kremlin's military planners are reading that same chapter right now and finding very few comfortable answers. Back to where we started. Putin on camera, the fog on the river, the quiet engines moving through the dark. 4 islands changed the fire control geometry of an entire front. They strangled a logistics network. They exposed the bankruptcy of a river fleet built for a war that no longer exists. And they did it while the man who ordered the occupation of this region was on television telling a different story. The narrow strip of water between Kherson and Oleshki is now something more than a front line. It is a demonstration of what modern warfare actually looks like when one side adapts and the other one doesn't. The coming months will tell us whether this was a turning point or a single dramatic chapter in a longer grinding story. But those 4 islands are held, and the river, for now, belongs to a different set of boots.